This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
It's the Noon Report from Family Life, bringing a Christian worldview to what's happening in New York, Pennsylvania, across the country, and around the world. Weather with Kevin Williams, plus special features and reports with the Family Life News team. Now, here's what's happening.
Hello again. Welcome to the broadcast. Winter weather advisories take effect from late tonight through tomorrow as a messy mix of snow and ice envelops the region. Meteorologist Dan Russell with WGRZ starts us off from Buffalo.
We'll see some snow. We're also going to see some sleet. We're also going to see some freezing rain, even some plain old rain, all the above. It's only about a 3 to 4 hour window here where we are looking at icy conditions.
An ice storm warning is in effect from 7 tonight through noon tomorrow for parts of western Pennsylvania, including DuBois, Clearfield, and Johnstown. Weather watcher Brett Thacker with ABC 27.
The really cold air is sitting up to our north. The really mild air is sitting to our south. And guess where good old Pennsylvania is? Temperatures either side of 32, and that makes for some wintertime slop.
Thacker says the ice action won't really start to intensify until after midnight. PennDOT is restricting high-profile vehicles on the turnpike starting at 7 o'clock tonight, and we're watching a possibly even more powerful storm develop for later this weekend, Saturday night into Sunday. President Trump is signing an executive order today that bans transgender athletes from competing in women's sports. Former NCAA Division I swimmer Paula Scanlon.
This is so exciting, but the biggest thing that I'm thinking to myself is the fact that we even have to do this and spend time and sign an executive order to say something as common sense as men do not belong in women's sports.
Pro-family groups argue trans athletes raise privacy concerns in girls' locker rooms. Many women's sports activists, like Scanlon, argue biological boys competing against girls is a safety issue as well. President Trump could also sign today an executive order that dismantles the U.S. Education Department. He wants to return education policy to the states. The first batch of criminal migrants deported from this country have been flown to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The U.S. Navy base is being used as a detention facility for thousands of illegal immigrants. The president of El Salvador has offered to house illegals who are arrested in this country. President Trump breaking major news when it comes to the Middle East.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it.
Trump making that announcement last night during a joint news conference with Israel's Prime Minister. Benjamin Netanyahu had nothing but praise for the U.S. president.
You see things others refuse to see. You say things others refuse to say. And after the jaws drop, people scratch their heads and they say, he's right.
Trump last night said that Gaza is a demolition site and Palestinians should be resettled elsewhere until that territory is rebuilt. He also did not rule out the possibility of sending in U.S. troops. Trump ally Lindsey Graham.
I think that'd be a tough place to be assigned if you're an American soldier. We'll see what the Arab world says, but, that'd be problematic at many, many levels.
NBC's Richard Engel.
Many Palestinians don't want to go. The neighboring countries, particularly Egypt and Jordan, don't want to take them in. And for administration and for a president who said that he wants to get out of foreign wars, this would certainly be a very potentially violent entanglement.
The president last night said he'd like to make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East. The U.S. Army smashed recruiting records in December. It saw the biggest numbers in 15 years. 350 people a day were enlisting. Defense Secretary Hegseth says it's proof that America's youth want to serve under this president. USAID is getting doged. The Department of Government Efficiency is shutting down that international development agency and laying off workers worldwide. It's yet another sign of the power bestowed on Elon Musk. Reporter Ryan Nobles.
From influence over cabinet picks to the entire reshaping of federal departments, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, has taken on a major role in the new Trump administration. But Democrats worry he is making a lot of decisions with very little oversight and in some cases against the law.
Maryland Democrat Chris Van Hollen led a protest yesterday over the Musk moves outside the Treasury Department.
We have to fight this in the courts. We have to fight this in the Congress. We have to fight this in the streets. Stop the coup, stop the grift, stop Elon Musk.
But White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says Musk is uncovering a lot of government waste and should be congratulated, not scolded. She points to some of what USAID is spending your tax dollars on.
$70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
Senate Majority Leader John Thune supports the government downsizing effort being led by DOGE.
I do think they have the right to review funding and how those decisions are made and what priorities are being funded.
Still, a lot of Democrats are concerned about the level of access given to Elon Musk when it comes to sensitive information. The Treasury Department says Musk can only read that data. He cannot alter it. Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman joined the 53 Republicans in the U.S. Senate yesterday in confirming Pam Bondi as U.S. Attorney General. Joe Gamaldi with the Fraternal Order of Police.
We are ecstatic to have Pam Bondi as our Attorney General. I mean, you're looking at someone who is a career prosecutor, hard-nosed, no-nonsense, who's had the support of law enforcement throughout her career.
The former Florida AG's pledged as head of the Justice Department to stop the weaponization of our federal government. The U.S. Postal Service no longer accepting packages from China. Parcels that derive from the communist country are off limits until further notice. Letters are not affected. This news comes just days after a new 25% tariff on Chinese imports took effect. China's own retaliatory tariffs kick in next week. Customers of an almost always open restaurant will be paying a bit more. Jim Krasula tells us why.
High egg prices have caught up with Waffle House. The popular restaurant chain is putting a 50-cent per egg surcharge on its meals for the time being. Waffle House says it can no longer eat the high price of eggs. It has to pass on some of its higher cost to customers.
President Trump is going to the Super Bowl. He'll be in New Orleans for the big game Sunday night when the Chiefs tackle the Eagles. Trump is the first president ever to attend the Super Bowl in person. Sitting president, that is. A record 22.6 million employees plan to miss work on Monday, the Monday after the Super Bowl. That's up from 18.8 million last year. Cheryl Casoni with Fox Business.
Why is this not a national holiday? Again, I ask this every year. It never happens. I don't get it. But 8 million people say it's going to be a game time decision. And then 68% say that they will talk to their boss about it. They're just going to be open about it this year. Hey, likely I'm not going to be at work on Monday.
43% of Americans surveyed believe the Monday after the Super Bowl should be a holiday. Still to come on the Noon Report. SUNY head gets a pay bump. High-profile trial in Chautauqua County and getting ready for the ice storm.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Williams. We're tracking some messy weather on the way for tomorrow. I'll have the latest forecast coming up in 10.
All right, Kevin, I know a lot of folks are going to want to stick around for that, but let's check the stories making news where you live next. President Trump's 10% tax on Chinese imports is raising concerns within the pharmaceutical industry. It's worried about a possible shortage of life-saving drugs, including many cancer treatments that are manufactured in China. We get more on the story from WGRZ's Ron Plant.
China makes many medical devices and even PPE, the protective surgical gowns and gloves that we heard about so much during COVID. However, the American Medical Manufacturers Association does support tariffs on China, saying it's better overall for the U.S. supply chain and national security.
From China to Canada, New York's Governor Kathy Hochul's highlighting the trade relationship with our neighbor to the north.
The governor sat down with Canadian Consul General Tom Clark on Tuesday, and Hochul says she's focused on affordability for New Yorkers, and that relationship, she says, with Canada will affect that depending on what happens out of Washington.
The trade relationship is critical, and the amount of trade, I don't think people can appreciate how that impacts the cost of living.
Her meeting with Canada's Consul General comes after fears fears of a trade war. U.S. tariffs against Canada announced by President Trump and retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. were put on hold for a month. Scott Pringle, New York.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro pitched pot in his third budget address to the joint session of the General Assembly yesterday. Shapiro says recreational marijuana is a cash cow for the Keystone State.
Letting this business operate in the shadows, it doesn't make sense. And by doing nothing, we are making Pennsylvania less competitive.
But Michael Gear with the Pennsylvania Family Institute says the profits from pot are not worth it.
There's a long litany of concerns and dangers looming with this possible legalization: impaired driving, workplace dangers, growth in organized crime and cartel activities. It's a gateway to more dangerous drug abuse and addiction.
Governor Shapiro proposed a more than $50 billion state spending plan during his 90-minute speech yesterday. Lawmakers have until June 30th to reach a deal on the budget. A second teenager has died from a weather-related car crash in Onondaga County, New York. 17-year-old Gia Myers succumbed to her injuries yesterday in a crash that took the life of her 15-year-old brother Gavin last week. Gia was driving when she lost control of the vehicle and collided with an SUV on Route 91 in the town of Pompey. Both Gia and Gavin Myers were students at Fabius Pompey High School. A bus driver for the Naples, New York school district facing charges today after bringing a gun onto a school bus earlier this week.
We're glad somebody called because you just never know. Nothing nefarious was planned with the firearm, but you see firearm and school bus and they just don't mix.
Yeah, they don't mix at all, says Ontario County Sheriff David Sorencione. He says the 57-year-old driver bought the gun at a Walmart in Geneva and then secured it under his seat on the school bus.
Nothing led any of us to believe that any of these kids were ever in danger. This was a purchase that appears to have been made for personal reasons. The judgment, be that what it may, it can play out in court now.
Ontario County deputies tracked down the bus and pulled it over in the town of Gorham with about a dozen BOCES students on board. The gun was not loaded. Jury selection continues today in the trial of Hadi Matar in Chautauqua County, New York. He is the guy accused of nearly stabbing to death Satanic Verses author Salman Rushdie. The author was attacked during a speech he gave at the Chautauqua Institution in Mayville back in 2022. That attack left Rushdie blind in his right eye. He is expected to take the stand during that trial. Nassau County, New York has designated 10 detectives to help ICE with detaining illegal immigrants. Correspondent Sarah Lee Kessler.
Nassau's Republican County Executive Bruce Blakeman is announcing that the detectives will be able to detain people living in the country illegally who've committed crimes when ICE agents aren't available. He says it's not about raids.
This is targeted enforcement of our laws based here in the state of New York, people who have committed crimes here and have violated federal laws by being in the United States illegally.
Blakeman says the county will be reimbursed for its support. I'm Sarah Lee Kessler.
The head of SUNY is getting a $125,000 pay raise. That puts SUNY Chancellor John King's yearly salary at over $1 million. King leads the 64-campus public college and university system in New York. Before that, he was the education commissioner for the state of New York. We've got sports news next. It's the 2-minute drill on the Family Life Noon Report.
Good afternoon, I'm Randy Snavely. Bob, for the first time in 2 years, the Buffalo Sabres have a 4-game winning streak. Alex Tuch scored twice and handed out an assist as the Sabres edged the Blue Jackets 3-2. Bowen Byram had the other goal for Buffalo as they are now 22-26-5 on the season. The Islanders pulled out a 2-1 victory over the Golden Knights. Bo Horvat scored his 19th goal of the season in the first, and then Brock Nelson broke a 1-1 tie midway through the third with his 16th goal of the season. The Penguins dropped a 3-2 decision in a shootout to New Jersey. The Flyers fell in overtime to Utah, also by a 3-2 score. Also skating to wins, the Caps, Maple Leafs, Lightning, Bruins, Jets, Oilers, Canucks, Red Wings, Ducks, and Canadiens. On the hardwood, the Knicks avoided a disaster on the road against Toronto. The Raptors came back from 23 points down in the third quarter to get within 1 point with 3 minutes to play. But Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart both hit a pair of shots to ice the game, 121-115. Brunson finished with 28 points. Karl Anthony Towns scored 27 and hauled down 20 rebounds. The Nets won their third straight, 99-97 over the Rockets. D'Angelo Russell nailed the go-ahead three-pointer in the game's final seconds. Keon Johnson led Brooklyn with 22 points. Welcome back, Joel Embiid, in his first game in a month. Embiid led the 76ers to a 118-116 victory over Dallas. Embiid had a triple-double, 29 points, 11 boards, and 10 assists. Tyrese Maxey also had a big game for Philly, scoring 33 and dishing out 13 helpers. Other winners, the Celtics, Bulls, Blazers, and Lakers. That is a look at sports.
Thank you, Randy. Man, still to come on the Noon Report, a Wednesday edition. Army recruiting shatters record. Trump signs transgender ban. And sports gambling is a big problem.
Welcome to Breakpoint, a daily look at an ever-changing culture through the lens of unchanging truth. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. Last week, the state of California dropped all felony charges against pro-life activist David Daleiden and fellow journalist Sandra Merritt. The two have been targeted since 2015 after they released a series of videos in which Planned Parenthood employees admitted to the selling of unborn baby parts. According to a statement by Daleiden's Center for Medical Progress, their hard-fought plea deal against the charge of unlawful recording will mean, and I quote here, no jail time, no fines, no admission of wrongdoing, and no probation. Praise God. This is a clear victory, not just for the accused, but for the entire pro-life cause and the entire American justice system. Steve Cooley, lead defense attorney for Daleiden, said this, quote, in my 5 decades as an attorney, 40 years of which were as a prosecutor, I've never seen such a blatant exercise of selective investigation and vindictive prosecution. The California attorneys general who initiated this case and pursued it for nearly 10 years should be ashamed for weaponizing their office to pursue people who were merely exposing illegality associated with the harvesting and sale of fetal body parts, end quote. Well, Daleiden has indeed been harassed by a whole series of prosecutors for the better part of a decade now, most notably former Vice President Kamala Harris when she was California's Attorney General. His so-called crime was exposing the despicable practices of the nation's most prominent abortion business, which, along with the National Abortion Federation, had been illegally marketing human remains for scientific research. Rather than go after the wrongdoers, prosecutors went after the ones exposing the wrongdoing. Daleiden, Merritt, and others recorded Planned Parenthood employees bragging about their ability to, quote, pull off a leg or two and secure livers and cardiac tissue. Another joke that if people were to hear that they were haggling over legs, they'd be like, quote, you are blank evil, end quote. Planned Parenthood's Cecile Richards, who passed away recently, led the way in denying all wrongdoing and accusing Daleiden of deceptive editing. If these revelations had to do with any other topic or any other organization, there's no question who would have been on trial. However, because in America, abortion has harmed everything and solved nothing, as two authors rightly put it, Daleiden has spent years fighting unjust criminal charges. The misguided zeal that motivated Harris and other progressive prosecutors demonstrates just how much abortion has operated at the very center of progressive ideology for a while now. It is the most sacred of all the progressive sacred cows, uniting 3 non-negotiable priorities: absolute individual autonomy, the prioritization of sex, and the willingness to harm self or others for the sake of so-called freedom. To preserve the most radical abortion laws in the Western world, corporate and government activists are willing to turn the legal system completely on its head. Despite the very clear science that a preborn child is indeed a child, and Despite the dramatic legal victory 3 years ago with the Dobbs decision, many of our neighbors remain unconvinced that humans in the womb are worth saving, and they remain convinced of all the myths surrounding sexual autonomy. We do not yet know whether ours is a Wilberforce moment of God-granted victory or a Bonhoeffer moment, one that will cost us everything. As Chuck Colson said, God has called us to faithfulness, not success. So even as we thank God for this end to David Daleidon's trials, at least for now, we must also ask ourselves if we too will take up our place in the same fight for life. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with Breakpoint. Today's Breakpoint was co-authored by Dr. Timothy Paget. And for more resources to live like a Christian today, visit us at breakpoint.org.
Thank you, John. Outside next, Kevin Williams.
Here is your family life weather forecast for this afternoon. It's cold, but other than a stray flurry near Lake Ontario, we'll have clouds and some mixed sun. The high temps in the 20s. Clouding up tonight. Snow, sleet, and freezing rain will be in the area late tonight into tomorrow morning. Tapering to a couple of showers, some drizzle tomorrow afternoon. Ice accretion could reach a quarter of an inch in parts of central and western Pennsylvania. Snow and sleet could accumulate a few inches in central New York. Early low temps tonight in the teens. High temperatures tomorrow in the upper 30s to lower 40s.
Thank you, Kevin. This is the Noon Report on Family Life. I'm your host, Bob Price. And here's what's happening Wednesday, the 5th of February. President Trump is signing an executive order today that bans trans athletes from competing in girls' sports. He put out a decree on his first day in office declaring there to be only two genders, male and female. He also barred any federal funding from going to hospitals that perform sex change operations on kids. President Trump could also sign an executive order today dismantling the U.S. Education Department. He wants to return education policy to the 50 states. An ice storm warning takes effect later today in parts of Pennsylvania. Places like DuBois, Clearfield, and Johnstown are under the gun till noon tomorrow. Meteorologist Janice Dean.
It is a quick mover, but it could cause a lot of problems in the short terms. Ice on the roadways and on the power lines could cause a lot of problems.
PennDOT's restricting high-profile vehicles on the turnpike starting at 7 to 9. We're watching another possibly more potent storm later this weekend, Saturday night into Sunday. President Trump has big plans for the Gaza Strip. He wants the U.S. to take over that Palestinian territory.
I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
NBC's Alice Barr.
The president proposing the U.S. redevelop the war-torn enclave.
Trump says the U.S. will rebuild the Gaza Strip, which he described as a demolition site during a joint news conference last night with the Prime Minister of Israel. The Jewish head of state seemed to like that idea.
President Trump is taking it to a much higher level. He sees a different future for that piece of land that has been the focus of so much terrorism. He has a different idea, and I think it's worth paying attention to this.
Trump says he is not ruling out sending U.S. troops to the Middle East. The White House is pulling almost all USAID workers off the job. Madeline Rivera reports.
USAID supporters outraged after Elon Musk said this week President Trump had signed off on shutting it down. Now the agency is under review, authorized by its new acting director, Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
More from correspondent Cammie McCormick.
USAID has more than 10,000 employees. About 2/3 of them serve overseas. Agreements with contractors are also being terminated.
President Trump is giving USAID workers 30 days to return home from overseas unless they are deemed essential workers. Pam Bondi's being sworn in today as the nation's 88th Attorney General. Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman joined the 53 Senate Republicans yesterday in confirming Bondi to the top law enforcement post in the country. The first group of deported migrants with criminal records arrived today at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. That U.S. naval facility has been transferred into a detention center for thousands of illegals.
About a dozen migrants are on the base, which can hold up to 120, but the Trump administration is expanding operations. Hundreds of Marines are being dispatched to Gitmo to set up tents to increase capacity temporarily. I'm Tammy Trujillo.
The U.S. Postal Service is suspending incoming packages from China and Hong Kong until further notice. This move is part of the new tariffs imposed on the communist regime. Letters are not affected. A new analysis from UCLA economists pegs the losses from the LA wildfires at nearly $165 billion with a B dollars. That would rank second behind only Hurricane Katrina as the costliest disaster in U.S. history. The monarch butterfly's in trouble. Reporter Michael Wallace.
A conservation group that conducts an annual count of monarch butterflies as they winter in the southwestern U.S. and Mexico says it only counted 9,100 of them this year. That was the second lowest total since the tracking began in 1997, when 1.2 million of the orange and black-winged butterflies were counted.
The federal government is working to list the monarch butterfly as an endangered species. You're listening to the Noon Report, a midweek edition on Family Life. And next at noon, Family Life News does a deep dive on the downside of sports betting.
I have a family of gung-ho Buffalo Bills fans, but it's only been in the past 3 seasons that I've camped out in front of the TV or in the stadium to watch every single game. And a takeaway I want to talk about isn't about the games, though I do have a few of those, but about the commercials, the sports betting commercials to be specific. I'm Martha Manikas Foster, and we're discussing gambling today on Family Life's Inside Out, where we talk about how God transforms his people from the inside out. My guest today is pastor and professor Dr. Rashawn Frost. He knows a lot more about football than I do, as a player at Auburn and as a coach. But the expertise we're relying on the most today is his love for Jesus and his position as senior fellow and director of research for the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. Rashawn, how did we get to now having Hollywood stars pitching ways to gamble right from your own couch?
It really took off in 2018. The U.S. Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. What the Supreme Court did in striking down what they call PAPSA, they left the issue to the states to decide. Mm-hmm. As of last year, actually, 2024, 38 states, including the District of Columbia, they have legalized sports betting. And on top of that, it's on the ballots of several other states.
So because we're not generally, I feel, hearing about the dangers of gambling in church, how dangerous is gambling morally, spiritually, financially? And if we're community-minded and Jesus calls us to be very concerned about our neighbors, how can easy access gambling hurt not just individuals, but entire communities?
You're right. Unfortunately, we don't speak as a church about gambling or the dangers of gambling anymore. And there are several problems. Moral dangers, the spiritual dangers, the financial, and I would also add relational as well. They actually overlap. So I always like to start with the great commandment.
Okay.
To love the Lord your God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then to love your neighbor as yourself. The problem with gambling is that it thrives on idolatry. It thrives on covetousness. It places the love of money above the love of God. Sports betting does a lot to damage people. Here's the danger that we really need to talk about. There's actually an increase of male to female interpartner violence. There's actually an 11% increase. So you're finding that Super Bowl weekend, because of sports betting, there's going to be an increase in domestic violence.
Oh my. That changes the mood and the finances of somebody who already has a history of domestic violence.
Right. So you got the interpartner violence, you got family violence. Also, those who engage in sports betting also binge drink at disproportionate levels than those who don't participate in sports betting. We're seeing physical and emotional health problems, and that's not even talking about the financial strain. It's bad not only for the individual, but for families and communities as well. There's an increase in bankruptcy rates, debt collections, debt consolidation loans, auto loan delinquencies. And it goes back to the passage where Jesus says, what profit is the man to gain the whole world and yet lose his soul?
Yeah.
Is it worth it?
So, Rashawn, what encouragement can you offer to listeners who realize that what they started playing around with, thinking it was not going to be a problem, has progressed to something more difficult to stop?
This is where I put my pastor hat on. The one thing I want to encourage people who may be in that situation, the bonds of sin are broken in Christ. That Christ breaks the chain of our addictions, because it is an addiction. And one of the ways that we can find that freedom through Christ is through Christian community. So one of the things that I would definitely advocate for is, one, confess your sins one to another, so that you may pray and be healed. There has to be an admission amongst the brothers or sisters, whoever this pertains to go to their church leadership, to their pastors and elders, and confess the sin. But confess it with also the asking of help, because it becomes an issue of accountability. We're talking about gambling addiction now. This goes across the board for a multitude of sins and sin issues. So the idea is part of the body of Christ through the local church is to provide a means of grace by which believers can find that freedom. The local church should be a place where people can feel safe to confess your sins to brothers and sisters and find the help they need to live in the freedom that Christ provides.
That's a good word.
It is indeed. Thank you, Martha. And that's pastor, professor, and former football player, Dr. Rashawn Cross, on this week's edition of Inside Out, talking about the downside of sports betting, which is huge business nowadays. You can subscribe, listen to, and share this feature and all our original podcasts at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or FamilyLife.org.
Good afternoon. Here is your Family Life regional weather forecast. We're watching a system in the western states moving rapidly east, and it will bring our region some messy weather late tonight and tomorrow. And there are several more systems in the pipeline, one for this weekend, one or two for next week. In the meantime, for this afternoon's cold, but other than a stray flurry near Lake Ontario, we'll have clouds and some mixed sun, the high temps in the 20s. Clouding up tonight. Snow, sleet, and freezing rain will be in the area late tonight into tomorrow morning, tapering to a couple of showers, some drizzle tomorrow afternoon. Ice accretion could reach 1/4 of an inch in parts of central and western Pennsylvania. Snow and sleet could accumulate a few inches in central New York. Early low temps tonight in the teens, high temperatures tomorrow in the upper 30s, the lower 40s.
All right, thank you, Kevin. Finally at noon, we're smack dab in the middle of winter, folks, and your skin knows it all too well.
The American Medical Association says your skin sheds about 30,000 dead skin cells every minute. Flakes of dead skin dropping off you at your home, in your car, and your place of business. And while this is a natural occurrence, in winter, it's exacerbated because of the heaters, dry air, and lack of hydration. Experts say you can improve your outlook by adding a humidifier and increasing healthy fat in your diet, the kind from avocados and nuts, not cake and cookies. I'm Bree Tennis.
All right, Bree, thank you very much. Nothing worse than dry, itchy skin. And by the way, did you know that skin is the largest organ in your body? Just look that up. All right, that's all the time we have today. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Bob Price, Family Life News.
You've been listening to the Noon Report, heard weekdays on Family Life. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.